The twin moons of Zalera cast an eerie glow over the execution grounds. The air was thick with tension, and the gathered crowd murmured in hushed voices. At the center of it all, bound in heavy chains, knelt a girl unlike any other in the galaxy, her emerald skin shimmering under the pale lunar light, her silver eyes wide with defiance despite the terror clawing at her chest. Zyra, daughter of the once great House Vorex, was about to die. Her crime? Treason. At least, that was the word the Zalarian High Tribunal used to justify her sentence. The truth was far simpler. She had dared to speak out against the Empire's cruelty. The Zalarians, the self-proclaimed rulers of this sector of space, had always governed with an iron fist. And when Zyra tried to expose their corruption, they silenced her parents, wiped out her house, and branded her a traitor. Now, she knelt on the cold stone, awaiting the final stroke of the high blade. The executioner stepped forward, his armor gleaming, his massive sword humming with a deadly energy field. He raised it high, and the murmurs of the crowd faded to silence. Then, everything changed. From the edge of the square, a figure moved. Not one of the executioners, not a soldier, but a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a worn-out combat jacket. The insignia on his shoulder was unfamiliar to most of the Zalarians, but those who recognized it stiffened in alarm. It was the mark of the Terrans. Of humans. Stop. His voice cut through the silence like a gunshot. The executioner hesitated, the sword pausing mid-air. The High Tribune, seated above the scene in a floating throne, narrowed his reptilian eyes. This does not concern you, off-worlder, the Tribune hissed. Step back before you share her fate. The human didn't move. If anything, he stepped forward, his boots echoing on the stone platform. See, that's where you're wrong, he said, voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. This concerns me very much. Zyra stared, her breath catching in her throat. Who was this man? And why would a human, a species largely indifferent to Zalarian politics, put himself in danger for her? The executioner, uncertain, looked to the Tribune for orders. The Tribune sneered. Kill them both. It happened fast. The executioner swung. The crowd gasped. But the human was faster. With reflexes honed from years of combat, he sidestepped the blade, drew a sleek, black firearm from his belt, and fired. The executioner's chest plate exploded inward, and the massive warrior crumpled. Panic erupted. Guards rushed forward, but the human moved like a force of nature, dodging energy blasts, weaving through enemies with precision that left even the trained Zalarian warriors struggling to react. Zyra barely had time to process what was happening before the man was at her side, cutting her restraints with a knife so sharp it severed the thick metal cuffs in one stroke. Can you run? He asked, breathless but focused. She swallowed hard, nodding. Good. Then let's move. Hand in hand, they ran. The square was chaos, civilians screaming, soldiers trying to reorganize, and in the midst of it all, one lone human tearing through their defenses like a hurricane. They reached the outskirts of the city, ducking into an alley where a sleek, black ship awaited them. It was a Terran stealth cruiser, compact but armed to the teeth. The human punched in a code, and the hatch hissed open. Zyra hesitated. Who are you? The man grinned. Captain Elias Rourke, Terran Defense Corps. But you can call me Eli. She blinked, the name unfamiliar, yet oddly reassuring. Why did you save me? His grin faded slightly, replaced by something softer. Because, he said, guiding her inside as alarms blared in the distance. I know what it's like to lose everything. And I don't believe in standing by while good people get crushed under tyranny. As the ship lifted off, Zyra looked down at the city that had been her prison. The Zalarians would hunt them. They would stop at nothing to reclaim her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Because against all odds, a human had stepped in. And if the stories were true, when humans got involved the galaxy itself could change. And so, her journey with Elias Rourke began. As the sleek Terran stealth cruiser rocketed through Zalarian airspace, alarms blared across the city below. Zyra peered through the viewport, watching as bright searchlights crisscrossed the sky, scanning for their escaped ship. Elias Rourke's fingers danced over the control panel. Hold on, he muttered, flipping a switch. The ship hummed, and suddenly, the view outside shimmered. The stars warped, the sky seemed to blur. Zyra's breath hitched. Cloaking technology? Rourke smirked. Best Terran engineering has to offer. As the ship disappeared from Zalarian scanners, the alarms below grew more frantic. Ships scrambled to give chase, but without a visual lock, they had no idea where to aim. They'll send a blockade after us, Zyra warned. The Empire doesn't take humiliation lightly. Rourke sighed, leaning back in his seat. Yeah, I figured. Lucky for us, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. He pressed another switch, and the ship's engines roared to full power, breaking through Zalera's atmosphere in seconds. Zyra let out a slow breath, watching as the planet shrank behind them. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't trapped. She wasn't at the mercy of the Empire. She was free, but that freedom came at a cost. They'll hunt you now, she said quietly. You just made yourself an enemy of the Empire. Rourke shrugged. Not my first time pissing off a galactic superpower. She frowned. You risked your life for a stranger. What? His expression darkened. I meant what I said back there. I know what it's like to lose everything. His voice was steady, but there was an old pain beneath it, something she could sense but didn't pry into. Instead, she studied him. His jacket was worn but sturdy, his boots scuffed from years of travel. He carried himself like a man who had seen too many battlefields, who had survived things he shouldn't have. She had heard of humans before, unpredictable, stubborn, fierce in a way that few other species could match. But she had never met one until now. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I have no home left. Nowhere to go. Rourke glanced at her, then turned back to the ship's navigation console. Then we'll figure something out. A soft beep interrupted them. Zyra tensed. What is that? Ship just picked up a distress signal. Rourke frowned, pulling up the data. Terran frequency. It's weak, but it's coming from the Velka Expanse. Zyra's heart skipped a beat. The Velka Expanse? That's deep into neutral space. Practically lawless. Exactly. Rourke narrowed his eyes at the screen. Whoever sent this signal is in trouble. A choice lay before them. They could run, disappear into the void, find a quiet corner of the galaxy where the Zalarians wouldn't find them. Or they could follow the signal, dive headfirst into another fight, another unknown battle. Zyra already knew what Rourke would choose. She had met him less than an hour ago, yet somehow, she knew. We're going after them, aren't we? She said. Rourke grinned, flicking a switch. The ship adjusted course, heading straight for the distress signal. Damn right we are. And just like that, they were no longer just fugitives. They were heading into the heart of something bigger, something dangerous, something humanity would never walk away from. As the ship hurtled toward the Velka Expanse, the distress signal grew stronger, erratic, desperate. Rourke's jaw tightened as he examined the incoming data. This isn't just a standard distress call. Someone's under attack. Zyra leaned closer. The coordinates placed the source near a drifting asteroid field. That was bad news. Asteroid belts were perfect for ambushes. Who would be sending a Terran distress signal this deep in neutral space? Only two kinds of people, Rourke said grimly. Lost travelers, or someone important enough to be hunted. Zyra's pulse quickened. If they're being hunted, then that means. Before she could finish, the ship's proximity sensors flared red. Rourke's instincts took over. He yanked the controls hard, throwing the ship into a sudden barrel roll just as a bolt of plasma fire streaked past them. Damn it, he snarled. We've got company. Zyra's heart pounded as she scanned the ship's sensors. 3 enemy ships, sleek and aggressive-looking, were closing in fast. Their markings were unmistakable. Zalarian bounty hunters, she whispered. Rourke clenched his jaw. Guess they didn't take kindly to me ruining their little execution. He flipped a switch, and the ship's weapons powered up. Hold on tight. Without warning, he dove into the asteroid field, weaving between the massive, tumbling rocks. The enemy ships followed, firing relentlessly. Zyra's grip tightened on the edge of her seat. You call this a plan? Improvising. Rourke shouted over the alarms. Works every time, mostly. A plasma blast skimmed their left wing, sending sparks across the cockpit. Zyra swore under her breath. They're gaining on us, she warned. Rourke's eyes flickered toward a particularly large asteroid ahead. A slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. Not for long. Without explanation, he gunned the engines, flying straight toward the asteroid. Zyra's eyes widened. You're not. He was. At the last possible second, he twisted the controls and sent the ship into a sharp spin, barely scraping past the rock's jagged edge. The bounty hunters weren't so lucky. One ship slammed straight into the asteroid, erupting into a fireball. Huh. That's one down, Rourke whooped. The remaining two ships were more cautious now, their formation shifting. Zyra's gaze flicked toward the distress signal, still pulsing on the screen. They're still out there, she said. We have to reach them. Rourke nodded. Time to end this. He suddenly cut the ship's engines. The move was reckless, insane, even, but it worked. The pursuing ships overshot them, caught off guard by the sudden stall. That was all Rourke needed. He slammed the controls, locking onto the nearest ship and firing a precise burst of ion blasts. The ship's engines flared, then died, sending it spinning helplessly into the debris field. Only one ship remained, and it wasn't running. Instead, it opened comms. A voice, deep and laced with venom, filled the cockpit. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, human. Rourke smirked. That's the fun part. The enemy ship suddenly accelerated, not toward them, but toward the distress signal's source. Zyra's eyes widened. They're going to wipe out whoever sent that signal. Rourke cursed under his breath and pushed the throttle to max, chasing after the last bounty hunter. The chase was brutal, twisting through the asteroid belt at breakneck speeds. Then, through the swirling debris, the source of the distress call came into view. A Terran vessel, small, barely holding together, its hull scorched and battered. Someone inside was fighting for their life. And the last bounty hunter was seconds away from finishing the job. Rourke's hands flew across the controls. Not today. He squeezed the trigger, and a railgun shot tore through the enemy ship's hull. It erupted into a cloud of fire and metal, vanishing into the void. Silence. Then, a crackling voice came over the radio. Weak but alive. This is Captain Doran Voss of the Halcyon, whoever you are. You just saved my damn life. Rourke exhaled, then smirked at Zyra. Told you. Improvising works. She shook her head. You're impossible. But for the first time in a long time, she smiled. And something told her their journey was only just beginning. The comm crackled again, this time with a cough before Captain Doran Voss's voice came through more clearly. I don't know who you are, he said. But if you've got any fuel to spare, I could really use a tow. Rourke glanced at Zyra, then back at the drifting ship. It was a wreck, scorched hull, one engine flickering, barely held together by what looked like sheer willpower. Yeah, Rourke muttered, we'll get you out of here. But first, you mind telling us why Zalarian bounty hunters were trying to turn you into space dust? A long silence followed. Then Voss exhaled. Because I'm carrying something they want. And if they were willing to chase me into an asteroid field, that means they'll be back. Zyra narrowed her eyes. Something? Or someone? Another pause. Then, quietly, Voss replied, both. Rourke and Zyra exchanged a glance before he flipped the ship's controls and locked onto the Halcyon with a docking tether. As the ships connected, Rourke grabbed his blaster and motioned for Zyra to follow. Let's see what's worth dying for. They crossed into the damaged ship, the air stale with smoke and burnt circuitry. Voss was exactly what Rourke expected, a grizzled, exhausted Terran in a battered flight suit, holding his side like he'd taken a hit. But it wasn't Voss who caught their attention. It was the girl. She was barely more than a teenager, with dark violet skin and glowing silver eyes, her arms wrapped tightly around a small bundle. An alien girl, clearly terrified, but standing her ground as they entered. Zyra immediately recognized her species. Alathari, she whispered in disbelief. The girl flinched, but didn't speak. Rourke frowned. All right, someone explain. Why is a Alathari girl on this ship, and why did Zalarian bounty hunters want her dead? Voss sighed. Because she's not just any Alathari. He motioned to the bundle in her arms. Zyra's breath hitched when she realized what it was. An egg. Her mother was the last queen of the Alathari, Voss said. Before she was assassinated. Rourke ran a hand down his face. Oh, for the love of. So you're telling me we just rescued an alien princess carrying the future heir to an empire? From bounty hunters. Not just bounty hunters, Voss said grimly. The Zalarian Dominion itself put a price on her head. They want to make sure the Alathari bloodline ends here. Zyra clenched her fists. That's genocide. Voss nodded. Yeah. And now that you helped me, they're gonna come for you too. Silence filled the ruined ship. Then, Rourke grinned. Well, he said, cracking his knuckles. Looks like we just started a war. Zyra groaned. You're impossible. The Alathari girl looked between them, uncertain. Then, quietly, she whispered, "You would fight for me?" Rourke looked at her, then at the egg in her arms. He exhaled. "Kid," he said, "I didn't sign up for this. But if the Dominion wants you dead, then they're gonna have to go through me first." The girl blinked, eyes wide. Then, for the first time, she smiled. And far in the distance, the shadows of more Zalarian ships began to appear. The hunt wasn't over. The proximity alarms blared before Rourke even had a chance to swear. Zalarian warships, sleek and hungry, were cutting through the darkness of space, locking onto their position with ruthless precision. "They brought a damn fleet," Rourke growled, racing to the cockpit. "Zyra, Voss, strap in. This is about to get ugly." Voss, still clutching his wounded side, cursed under his breath. "I told you, they don't leave loose ends." Zyra pulled the Lathari girl toward her, her mandibles clicking with worry. "We can't outrun them forever. The Halcyon won't last another dogfight." "Then we don't outrun them," Rourke said, flipping the comm switch. His hands flew over the controls, setting a course that made Zyra's eyes widen in horror. "We go straight through them." Voss barked a laugh. "You're insane." Rourke grinned. "Damn right." He slammed the thrusters forward, and the ship rocketed toward the incoming Zalarian fleet. Laser fire streaked past them, narrowly missing their hull. The enemy ships adjusted their formation, trying to box them in. "Brace for impact," Rourke shouted as he pulled the ship into a violent barrel roll. The force slammed them against their seats. The Lathari girl clutched her egg tightly, her breath coming in terrified gasps. Then, just as the Zalarians closed in, Rourke yanked the ship downward, straight toward the nearest warship. Alarms wailed as their sensors struggled to track his erratic movements. "What the hell is your plan?" Voss yelled. Rourke bared his teeth. "We're gonna use them against each other." At the last second, he veered away from the warship's hull. The pursuing Zalarian fighters weren't as lucky. Unable to correct their course in time, two slammed into their own flagship, igniting a cascade of explosions. Zyra hooped. "You mad genius." But there were still more ships, and they were adapting. "They're flanking us," Voss warned. "We won't dodge them all." Rourke took a deep breath. His eyes flicked to the Lathari girl, trembling but defiant. Then to Zyra, her warrior instincts sharp as ever. He wasn't about to let this be their last stand. "Zyra," he said, "remember that old signal trick we pulled at Orion's Edge?" Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I am." She hesitated, then grinned fiercely. "Then let's fry some circuits." Zyra dove to the console, her fingers flying as she hacked into their ship's communications array. A burst of distorted frequencies shot out, overloading the Zalarians' targeting systems. Confused, the enemy ships hesitated for just a second. But that was all Rourke needed. He spun the ship into a tight loop, dodging the final barrage of fire before rocketing toward the nearest jump gate. "They're recalibrating," Voss shouted. Too late. With a final surge, the ship blasted through the gate just as the Zalarian fleet regained control. The jump drive engaged, pulling them into the swirling abyss of hyperspace. Silence. Then laughter. Zyra threw her head back, exhaling shakily. "I can't believe that worked." Voss slumped against the wall, shaking his head. "I need a drink." Rourke let out a long breath, turning to face the Lathari girl. She was staring at him with something he hadn't expected. "Trust. You really fought for me," she whispered. Rourke smirked. "Yeah, well, someone's got to stick it to the bastards." She hesitated, then held out her hand. "My name is Liana." He clasped it. "Rourke, welcome to the wild side, kid." The journey wasn't over. The Zalarians would keep hunting them. The war for the Lathari throne was just beginning. But for now, they had hope. And sometimes, hope was enough to change everything.